A black old lady shelters 15 Hell's Angels during a snowstorm because she refuses to let anyone freeze to death on her porch. But when the sun rises and the storm clears, the entire town turns against her. They call her crazy. They call her reckless. Even her church throws her out. What no one knows is what those men felt in that house. That one night of kindness changed everything. Weeks later, she's alone, until the roar of engines echoes down her road. Not 15 this time. 100. They've all come back to stand for the woman who stood for them. But when the world's watching and faith is tested on every side, will love still be stronger than fear? Or will one small act of mercy spark a revolution no one saw coming? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind howled like a living thing that Christmas Eve. Snow blew sideways against the little farmhouse at the edge of the Montana woods, piling high against the porch rails. Inside, Ethel Mae Johnson sat near the old stone fireplace, stirring a pot of venison stew that filled the room with warmth and the smell of pepper and thyme. She moved slowly these days, her knees stiff from age, but her spirit was strong. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence, along with the faint hum of her gospel record spinning on the turntable. She sang along softly, her voice cracked but full of soul. It had been 10 years since her husband, Henry, passed. The nights had been lonelier since then. Her children had scattered, one in Atlanta, one in Seattle, and calls were short and polite. Holidays came and went, and the house grew quieter with each year. Still, Ethel Mae found peace in her routine. She ladled stew into a bowl for herself, whispering a prayer of thanks. Lord, you've kept me another year. I may be old, but I ain't cold. Not yet. Just then, the power flickered. The light bulb above her kitchen table dimmed, buzzed, and went out. The hum of the fridge died, and darkness filled the room, broken only by the orange glow of the fire. Ethel Mae sighed, shaking her head. Guess it's just you and me again, Lord. She reached for the lantern by the window and struck a match. The soft flame made the kitchen walls shimmer. Outside, the wind roared even louder. The snowstorm had grown mean. She pulled her shawl tight, moved to the window, and peered out into the swirling white. Nothing but snow. She whispered, I hope nobody's out there tonight. A few minutes later, she sat back down, spoon in hand, when a deep, pounding knock rattled her front door. She froze. The spoon clattered against the bowl. The knock came again, louder this time, heavy, desperate. Ethel's heart thudded. She wasn't expecting anyone. Not out here, 5 miles from town. Her hand trembled as she reached for her flashlight. She crept toward the door, listening. The wind howled, but underneath it she heard voices. Rough, male voices. Ma'am, please, we need help. She hesitated. She was 71 years old, alone, and this sounded like a bad idea. But something inside her stirred, a memory of the Good Samaritan story from church. Her late husband used to say, if somebody knocks, that's God's test of your faith. Her voice quivered as she called through the door. Who's out there? Please, a man shouted over the storm. We're stranded. 15 of us. The highway's shut down. We'll freeze. Ethel gasped. 15? Her mind raced. That was more men than her little house had chairs. But she pictured them out there in the cold, and her heart clenched. She whispered, Lord, give me courage. Then unlatched the door. The wind burst in, swirling snow into her hallway. Standing on her porch were 15 leather-clad men, faces red from the cold, snow clinging to their jackets marked with Hell's Angels Montana chapter patches. Their eyes were hard but pleading. The biggest one stepped forward, his breath puffing white in the air. "Our bikes crashed a mile up. We've been walking for hours. We don't mean no harm, ma'am. We just need a place to warm up." For a heartbeat, she could hear her pulse in her ears. She should have slammed the door. Every instinct told her to. But then she saw one of the younger men shivering violently, his lips blue. Another's hands were bleeding from the cold. "Good Lord," she whispered, stepping aside. "Get in here before you die." The men shuffled in, stomping snow from their boots, their breath fogging the air. The scent of leather and gasoline filled the room. "Thank you, ma'am," said the leader, the one with a scar across his cheek. "I'm Tank." She raised an eyebrow. "Tank? That your mama's name for you?" He chuckled, rubbing his hands. "Not exactly, ma'am." "Then you can call me Miss Ethel," she said, voice steady now. "You boys hungry?" There was a pause, then several murmured, "Yes, ma'am." "Well, don't just stand there looking cold. Sit." The men crowded into her tiny kitchen, their giant frames almost comical against the lace curtains and floral tablecloth. She ladled out bowls of stew, and one by one, they ate like men who hadn't tasted kindness in years. As they thawed by the fire, the tension softened. One told a story about his bike breaking down in the desert. Another talked about his little girl he hadn't seen in 5 years. Miss Ethel listened, nodding, sometimes laughing, sometimes shaking her head. The walls of her home seemed to breathe again. By midnight, the storm was still raging outside, but inside, there was warmth, food, and the sound of men singing along, awkwardly but sincerely, to Ethel's gospel record. She sat in her rocker, smiling at the sight of these rough men sprawled out on her floor, snoring softly, their boots lined by the stove. Before going to bed, she whispered, "Thank you, Lord. I reckon you sent me a Christmas choir after all." Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the world in white. Inside, a house once filled with silence now glowed with life. Dawn crept in slow and gray, the storm still busy but gentler than before. The house smelled like wood smoke and stew. Miss Ethel woke to the soft rumble of snores and the crackle of the fire. For a moment she forgot the night before. Then she opened her eyes and saw big men curled under quilts on her rug, boots lined like soldiers along the stove. And she remembered. She had opened her door and her life to strangers. She slipped her feet into warm slippers and moved carefully around the sleeping men. One had an arm tossed over his face. Another hugged a pillow like a child. The youngest, a wiry fellow with grease under his nails, shivered and pulled the quilt tighter. She tucked the edges around his shoulders and patted his back. He sighed and settled. The kettle on the stove was cold. She set it on the flame and waited for the soft hiss to become a whistle. Her kitchen window wore a lace of frost. She traced a little cross in it with her fingertip and whispered, "Thank you for keeping us through the night." When the kettle sang, a few men stirred. The biggest, Tank, sat up first. He rubbed his neck and scanned the room like a sentry waking on duty. When he saw Miss Ethel already at the stove, he stood, careful not to step on anyone. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice low so as not to wake the others. "You didn't have to fuss over us." "I fuss over folks who live under my roof," she said, pouring hot water over coffee grounds. "That includes you until you step back out that door." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." She opened the back door to check the world. Cold air spilled in, bright and sharp. Snow lay high on the porch like a drifted quilt. Tank shrugged into his jacket and followed, stepping out in his socks to keep the floor clean. He squinted at the sky. "Storm's easing," he said. but we got work to do if we want to get moving." "You got work to do?" she teased. "Or we got work to do?" He chuckled. If you'll let us." Inside, more men sat up, hair wild, faces creased from sleep. They blinked at the light, and at this little kitchen that felt, for some reason, like home. Miss Ethel handed out steaming mugs. "Drink. Warms the belly and the spirit," she said, "and I got oatmeal on the way. No arguing. You need fuel." They didn't argue. The youngest, the one she had tucked in, murmured, "Thank you, ma'am." Another, a man with kind eyes and a stitched-up knuckle, cradled his cup like a treasure. "I'm Miguel," he said. "If you need anything fixed, I'm your guy. Cars, pipes, whatever." She nodded toward the hallway. "Funny you say that. The water's been acting proud. Pipes rattle like a bag of coins. Been meaning to call somebody." Miguel perked up. "Let me take a look after breakfast." "After breakfast," she agreed. "Even heroes need oats." They ate standing and sitting wherever they could find space. At the counter, on a stool, on the floor near the stove. The food was simple. Oatmeal with cinnamon and honey, toast, and the last of the stew warmed and shared. But there was plenty. Between bites, the men traded quiet jokes and glances that said more than words. This was safety, and none of them took it for granted. "Before you start on chores, I'm going to say a quick prayer," Miss Ethel said, wiping her hands on a towel. A hush fell. Some bowed their heads without being told. Others looked unsure, then followed the other's lead. "Lord," she said, her voice soft but steady, "you brought these sons to my door, and you gave me a full pot and a warm fire. Thank you for keeping their bones from freezing and their hearts from breaking. Help us work with gentle hands and grateful souls. Keep them safe on the road when they go." Amen. A low chorus of Amen rolled across the kitchen. Tank cleared his throat. "My mom used to pray like that," he said. "Haven't heard it in a long time." "Well," she said, "you just heard it now, and you can hear it again anytime you like." Work began the way good work always did, small and steady. Tank pulled on boots and found the axe by the back steps. He split wood in clean, strong strokes, breath puffing white, the rhythm like a heartbeat for the yard. Two men shoveled the porch and cleared a path to the driveway, laughing when snow slid back into their boots. Another checked the generator, swearing softly, then apologizing when he remembered where he was. Miguel crawled under the sink with a flashlight and a rag. The pipes clanked and hissed. He twisted and tapped and finally grinned. "Whoever put this in forgot a washer. I rigged one from a soda cap and some tape. Not pretty, but it'll hold." "Pretty is as pretty does," Miss Ethel said. "And that right there does just fine." Inside, she baked cornbread with the last of her flour and set a pan of beans to simmer. The smell drifted through the house and drew the men in like a welcome song. She poured sweet tea into jelly jars and set them along the counter. When Tank came in, hair damp with melted snow, he paused and breathed deep. "Smells like my grandma's place," he said, surprised by his own words. "Then sit and rest," she replied. "Let your grandma fuss a bit." He sat, big hands around a small jar. His eyes shone in the steam. By late morning, the sky broke open to a pale blue. The road still wore a thick cover of snow, but the wind had calmed. The men gathered in the kitchen, hats in hand, suddenly shy. "We better try for the highway," Tank said. "If we take it slow, we can make it to town and get the bikes towed." Miss Ethel nodded, though her heart pinched. She had grown used to the sound of voices in the house again. She wrapped cornbread in foil and slid it into a paper bag, added apples from her pantry, and topped it with a dish towel she had embroidered years ago. "Food for the road," she said, handing the bag to Miguel. "Bring my towel back someday." "Yes, ma'am," he said, then looked like he might cry. I'll bring it back clean." She lined them by the door and pressed a little blessing into each set of hands. A pair of dry socks for one, a scarf for another, a jar of salve for cracked knuckles. To the youngest, she slipped a peppermint from a candy dish. "For courage," she said. Finally, she stood in front of Tank. Up close, she saw the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar that split his eyebrow, the hard life that had taught him to brace himself for pain. She took his rough hand in both of hers. "You are not what the worst day says you are," she told him. "Go in peace, ride in wisdom." He swallowed. "You saved us, Miss Ethel." "I fed you," she said. "God did the saving." They stepped onto the porch. The world was bright and clean. The men trudged down the path they had shoveled, boots sinking into soft drifts. At the gate, they turned and lifted their hands in thanks, awkward and sincere. "Be good," she called, "and be kind. That's the hard part." They laughed, and then they were gone, dark figures moving through a white world toward the road. Inside, the house felt bigger and quieter. She picked up a stray glove, folded a blanket, and stood for a while by the window, watching the path fill again as light snow began to fall. Her chest ached in a tender way, like a bruise touched by a friendly hand. The landline crackled. She jumped, then hurried to the phone on the wall. The old ring rattled the quiet. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through, tight and cool. "Ethel May, this is Pastor Whitfield. I heard a rumor about last night. Tell me it isn't true." She looked at the clean path, the cut wood stacked neat, the steady fire, the warm kitchen, the patched pipes, the empty mugs lined like little soldiers waiting for orders. She felt the truth settle inside her like a stone. Solid, simple, right. "It's true, Pastor," she said, calm as a held hand. "I opened my door." Silence hummed on the line. Then a sharp sigh. "We need to talk," he said. "This could bring trouble." She looked at the apple cores in the trash, the peppermint dish with one candy missing, the paper bag of cornbread now on its way to town. "Then we'll talk," she said. "Tomorrow." She hung up and stood very still. Outside, the snow fell soft as a benediction. Inside, the fire popped and settled. She whispered one more prayer for the men on the road. Then she took her rocker by the window and waited for evening to come, steady as the ticking clock, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The next morning dawned bright and sharp, okay, snow sparkling like sugar under the sunlight. Miss Ethel's little farmhouse looked like a picture on a Christmas card, but her heart felt heavier than it had in a long time. She'd slept poorly after the call from Pastor Whitfield, his words echoing in her mind. This could bring trouble. She made herself busy to push the worry away, sweeping the porch, tending the fire, and stirring oatmeal on the stove. The warmth of yesterday still lingered faintly in the air. 15 cups lined the sink, a boot print near the back door, the faint smell of leather and soap. For the first time in years, her home had felt alive. After breakfast, she bundled up in her coat and trudged down her driveway to fetch the mail. The snow squeaked under her boots. Her breath puffed white clouds. She saw fresh tire tracks on the road, evidence that the bikers had made it out safely. Relief softened her chest. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. But in town, things were already stirring. By the time she reached the general store that afternoon, eyes followed her everywhere. People paused mid-conversation when she walked in. Mrs. Combs, who usually chatted her ear off at the counter, offered only a tight-lipped smile. "Well, if it isn't Miss Ethel," said Deacon Lloyd, standing near the display of canned beans. His tone was smooth but sharp underneath. "Heard you had quite a houseful last night." Ethel set her bread and milk on the counter. "You heard right," he chuckled low. 15 bikers, Hell's Angels no less. You must be braver or crazier than the rest of us. "I'm not brave," she said simply. "Just couldn't let folks freeze to death." The cashier, a young man named Kenny, fumbled her change and nearly dropped it. "They didn't hurt you, did they?" Ethel looked him in the eye. "No, they helped me fix my pipes, chopped my wood, and said grace over breakfast." The store went quiet. Someone whispered, "She's lying." Ethel gathered her bag. "Believe what you want," she said, "but kindness don't pick sides." She walked home with her chin high, though her stomach churned. By the time she reached her porch, snow had started again, thin flakes falling like feathers. She set her groceries down and leaned against the railing, breathing in the quiet. That night she got another call. Pastor Whitfield again. "Ethel May, we had a meeting," he said. "Some of the deacons are concerned. They think your actions might put the church's reputation at risk." She tightened her grip on the phone. "Reputation? I thought the church was about compassion." "It is," he said quickly. "But people are talking. We can't appear to be supporting that kind of crowd." "That kind of crowd?" she repeated slowly. "You mean the kind that's poor, lost, and trying to find warmth?" The pastor sighed. "I'm asking you to be careful, Ethel May. Please, stay out of the papers." She hung up without saying goodbye. The next few days grew lonelier. The phone barely rang. Ruth Ann, her neighbor and closest friend, didn't stop by like usual. When Ethel waved from her porch, Ruth Ann gave a small, guilty nod but didn't cross the yard. On Sunday, Ethel dressed in her best blue coat and walked to church. Snow had melted into slush on the road, and her boots squelched with every step. Inside, the sanctuary buzzed with whispers. Heads turned as she entered. She took her usual seat near the front, but Deacon Lloyd leaned over and said softly, "That seat's taken today." Ethel blinked. "It's been mine for 40 years. He just looked away. She found another pew near the back. The sermon that morning was about spiritual caution and the dangers of associating with darkness. Pastor Whitfield never looked at her, but his words hit like pebbles. When the final hymn ended, she stood slowly. No one spoke to her as she left. Even the pastor's wife turned away when their eyes met. Outside, Ruth Ann hurried up, clutching her gloves. "Ethel, please don't be upset," she whispered. "People are just nervous. You know how small towns are." "I know," Ethel said, her voice steady, "but nerves don't excuse cruelty." She walked home under a gray sky, the cold biting her cheeks. Inside, she lit a fire and sat alone at the table, her Bible open but unread. The silence pressed heavy. Then she remembered Tank's words before he left. "You saved us, Miss Ethel?" Had she? Or had she ruined her standing in the only community she'd ever known? She rose, went to the window, and stared out at the snow-covered yard. In the distance, the path the bikers had shoveled was still visible, though the edges were blurring. It felt like a metaphor, something good being slowly erased by time and gossip. She pulled her journal from the shelf and began to write. "People talk, Lord, they always have. But you saw what happened here. You know those men were gentle, grateful, and kind. I'll keep my door open, even if it means keeping my church door shut. Faith without love ain't faith at all." When she finished, she folded her hands and prayed silently until the fire burned low. By the time she climbed into bed, she had made a quiet decision. She would not hide or apologize for what she did. If helping those men was wrong, then she didn't want to be right. Outside, The wind carried the faint sound of something on the road, a single motorcycle engine fading into the night. It was too far to see, but she smiled anyway. "Ride safe, boys," she whispered. "Ride safe." Morning light poured weakly through the frosted windows, and the farmhouse felt both peaceful and heavy. Miss Ethel moved about the kitchen, setting a kettle on the stove, her movements slow, her mind elsewhere. She'd always believed kindness came back in time, like seeds planted in hard soil, but lately it seemed that all her kindness had grown into thorns. When she looked out the window, she noticed something that made her chest tighten. Ruth Ann's car was parked halfway down the lane, her friend sitting inside, not getting out. Ethel lifted her hand in greeting. Ruth Ann hesitated, then drove off without waving back. Ethel sighed and sat at the table. The chair across from her, once her husband's, sat empty as always. She traced her finger along the rim of her teacup. "Lord," she murmured, "I can take the cold, but it's the silence that gets me." After lunch, she heard the tires of a car crunching up her drive. Peering through the window, she saw the sheriff's cruiser stopping at her gate. Sheriff Hal Porter stepped out, his breath fogging the air, his hat pulled low. He walked with that careful, heavy gait of a man who didn't want to be where he was. She met him at the door before he could knock. "Morning, Sheriff," she said evenly. "What brings you out here in this weather?" He took off his hat, fidgeting with it. "Afternoon, Miss Ethel. Just doing a follow-up. Heard about your visitors the other night." "You heard right," she said. "Folks are worried, that's all. Those men have got a record. Whole gang's been in trouble before. I need to make sure you're safe." She folded her arms, chin lifted. They were nothing but gentlemen under this roof. The sheriff's eyes softened a little, but his voice stayed cautious. "You sure they didn't take anything? Didn't threaten you?" Ethel's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "They took my stew, Sheriff. They threatened my loneliness. That's about it." He sighed. "You know people are talking. Pastor Whitfield came to me. Said maybe we should keep an eye out. Said this could bring the wrong kind of attention to the church." Ethel's heart squeezed. "The wrong kind of attention," she repeated softly. "You mean the kind Jesus got for eating with sinners?" The sheriff looked down, embarrassed. "I'm not saying you did wrong, ma'am. Just be careful. Folks don't understand people like them." Ethel stepped aside and pointed towards the firewood, neatly stacked by the wall. "Then maybe they should. Those boys chopped that wood in the freezing cold, fixed my pipes, prayed with me before they left. Now you tell me, Sheriff, how many so-called good folks in town would have done that?" He didn't answer. After a moment, he put his hat back on. "You're a brave lady, Miss Ethel, but sometimes bravery and trouble walk close together." "Then let 'em walk," she said. "The Lord will sort which is which." After he left, she stood on her porch for a long time, watching his taillights fade down the snowy road. Her heart hurt, but she refused to let bitterness take root. She whispered to the cold air, "Forgive them, Lord. They just don't see yet." The next day, the local paper showed up at her gate. A young reporter with too much curiosity and not enough tact stood there with a notepad in hand. "Miss Johnson, is it true you sheltered members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang during the storm?" "It's true I sheltered 15 men from freezing to death," she replied. "Weren't you afraid?" "I was," she admitted, looking him in the eye. "But fear doesn't feed hungry people. Faith does." The next morning, her phone rang again. Ruth Ann's voice trembled on the line. "Ethel, have you seen today's paper?" "No, I don't buy it much." Ruth Ann hesitated. "They printed your picture, honey. Front page. Biker Granny brings outlaws home." Ethel's heart sank. "Oh, Lord." "And folks, Well, they're upset. Pastor Whitfield says it's causing a scandal. Ethel closed her eyes, steadying herself. A scandal, huh? For showing hospitality? That afternoon, she drove to church, her old sedan rattling down the road. When she walked into the fellowship hall, the chatter stopped cold. Pastor Whitfield stood at the front, mid-conversation with Deacon Lloyd. Ethel May, the pastor said, forcing a smile. We were just... She lifted a hand. Don't bother softening it, Pastor. I heard. He sighed. Ethel, you've always been a pillar here. But this situation's difficult. Maybe it's best if you take a little break from teaching Sunday school, just until things settle. A lump rose in her throat, but her voice stayed calm. If things settle, Pastor, it'll be because someone had the courage to stir them right first. He frowned. Ethel, please. You're making this harder than it has to be. Harder than watching good men freeze? She asked. Harder than being told compassion is bad press? No one spoke. She looked around at the faces she'd known for decades, the ones who'd shared potlucks, sung hymns, cried at funerals. None met her gaze. At last, she turned for the door. You can take my class, Pastor, she said softly, but you can't take my calling. Outside, the wind was sharp again, the kind that found its way through every coat. As she walked home, tears finally fell, freezing before they reached her chin. At home, she lit her fire and made tea. The room glowed gold, and for a moment she just sat there, staring at the empty chairs where 15 men had sat not long ago, laughing, sharing, alive. She whispered, Lord, I did what you'd have me do. So why's the world so angry about love? There was no answer but the soft pop of burning wood. Yet, deep inside, something in her spirit held steady. That night, as snow began to fall again, Ethel stood at the window and whispered one last prayer. If I was wrong, forgive me. But if I was right, show me that I ain't alone. Far away, somewhere down the mountain road, the faint hum of a motorcycle drifted through the night air. So distant she could almost believe she imagined it. Still she smiled, a tear glinting in the eye, firelight. Maybe you just did. 2 weeks passed. The snow along Ethel's fence had melted into gray slush, but the cold in town still hung thick. People at the market whispered when she walked by. No one said her name aloud, but she could feel it fluttering in the air like dust. That's her, they'd murmur. The woman who brought those bikers home. At first, Ethel held her head high and smiled anyway. She'd been through worse things than gossip. But loneliness had a way of settling in, heavy as a quilt. Even Ruth Ann hadn't stopped by since the newspaper story ran. Then one morning, as she stepped onto the porch to feed her chickens, she spotted an envelope wedged in the screen door. Her name was written across it in shaky block letters. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a crisp $200 bill. Dear Miss Ethel, you saved my life that night. I've been sober 2 weeks now. You said God don't waste anybody, and I think you're right. Thank you for the stew, for the prayer, and for not looking at me like I was trash. You're the first person who called me son in years. Miguel. Ethel sank into her porch chair, clutching the letter to her chest. The sun was just rising, golden over the fields, and for the first time since that awful Sunday, she felt warmth deeper than the fire could give. She whispered, Thank you, Lord. You didn't forget me. That evening, she pinned the letter to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a heart. Each time she walked by, her eyes caught on those words. You're the first person who called me son. Over the next week, more letters came. One was from a man named Wheels, the youngest biker, written in messy handwriting. Ma'am, I told my little boy about you. I said an angel helped us. He drew you a picture. Said you look like his grandma. Thank you for feeding my dad." Another came from Tank himself. "Ma'am, I don't talk much, but you need to know something. That night in your house changed a lot of us. We've been meeting every Sunday now. Ain't in a church, just out by the shop. We pray before we ride. I hadn't done that since I was a kid. We still talk about your stew. Still talk about your kindness. You gave us more than a warm night. You gave us a reason to believe we could be better." Tank. Ethel read that letter 3 times before folding it neatly and slipping it into her Bible. Her eyes filled with tears that weren't from sadness. She began humming again when she cooked. The house no longer felt like a burden of memories. It felt alive. She even baked an extra loaf of cornbread and left it on Ruth Ann's porch, a silent olive branch. But good things rarely come without testing. One afternoon, Ethel returned from town to find something spray-painted across her fence in red letters. "Traitor." She stopped cold, her grocery bag falling into the snow. The word glared at her like an accusation from every direction. She looked up and down the road. No one there, no car tracks, no witnesses. For a long time, she just stood staring. Then she set down her groceries, fetched a bucket of water, and got to work scrubbing. The cold bit her fingers, but she kept going, one brush stroke at a time. As she worked, she spoke softly, almost like praying. "They can paint hate on my fence, Lord, but they can't write it on my heart." By the time she finished, her hands were raw and pink. The word was gone. Only the faint ghost of color remained. She rinsed the brush, dried her hands, and looked up at the darkening sky. A car slowed near her driveway. Ruth Ann's. For a moment, it looked like her friend might stop. But then the car rolled on. Ethel whispered, "You'll come around when it's time." That night she built a fire and made herself tea. The house crackled with warmth again. She reread Miguel's letter, the corners already creased from her fingers. When she went to bed, she prayed not for the vandals, not even for her reputation, but for strength to keep her door open, no matter who knocked next. The next morning, as she swept her porch, she saw something lying at the end of her driveway. Another envelope, damp from snow. Inside was a small photograph of 15 men standing in front of motorcycles, Tank in the middle, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Thank you, Miss Ethel." At the bottom of the photo, someone had written in marker, "Your family now." Ethel pressed the picture to her heart, smiling through tears. The town might whisper, her church might turn away. But somewhere out there, a band of rough men were praying again, and she had a family she never expected. And deep inside, she felt the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. By the time March winds began sweeping across the valley, the snow had started to give way to muddy ground and puddles that glittered like broken glass in the sunlight. The town thawed a little too, but not toward Miss Ethel. Though she carried herself with the same quiet dignity, she could feel the chill every time she stepped into the post office or grocery store. Folks would smile tight, whisper when she passed, and then look away. Still, every few days, a letter arrived, each one from a different biker. One came on paper torn from a notebook, another on lined stationery covered in smudged fingerprints. Some were simple thank yous, others told of new jobs, reconciled families, or prayers said before meals for the first time in years. She kept them all in a small wooden box on her table. It was becoming her treasure chest, full of proof that kindness mattered. Each evening she'd read one aloud to herself before bed, letting their words chase away the loneliness. But one morning, that fragile piece cracked. A sharp knock came at her door just as she was pouring coffee. When she opened it, she found Deputy Harris standing there, a nervous young man in a too-big uniform. He tipped his hat politely. "Morning, Miss Ethel. The sheriff asked me to check on you again." "Check on me?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Am I sick and didn't know it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "No, ma'am. Just some folks in town filed a complaint. Said there's been some, strange mail coming your way. Outlaw letters, they called them." Ethel blinked. "Outlaw letters?" "Lord have mercy. They're thank you notes." "Yes, ma'am, I understand, but, well, the pastor said it's best to make sure everything's proper. People are nervous with all that talk in the papers." She folded her arms. "You can tell the pastor that my mailbox is my own business. I don't need his permission to receive gratitude." The deputy flushed red and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. I'll tell him." As he walked away, Ethel stood in her doorway, shaking her head. The quiet street stretched before her, all fences and frozen gardens, peaceful on the outside, petty underneath. That Sunday she decided not to go to church. Instead, she brewed tea, set out her letters on the table, and listened to the radio preacher talk about loving your enemies. She smiled at the irony. But late that night, as she was washing dishes, something thudded against her window. She jumped, heart hammering. Then came another thud, and a wet splatter sliding down the glass. She rushed to the door and opened it just in time to see two figures running down the road, laughter echoing behind them. Her porch light revealed the mess. Eggs smashed across her window, yolks dripping onto the siding. Ethel's throat tightened, but she refused to cry. She fetched a bucket of water and began to clean. As she scrubbed, her arms shaking with cold, she whispered, "Forgive them, Lord. They don't even know why they hate." By the time she finished, her hands were numb, and the stars were out. She stood under their pale light and whispered, "If this is the price of love, I'll keep paying it." The next morning the phone rang again. It was Pastor Whitfield. "Ethel May," he began, voice clipped. "There's concern among the congregation. The vandalism on your property is escalating. We think it best for you to lay low, perhaps stop speaking to those bikers, at least publicly." She gripped the receiver tightly. "You think silence stops cruelty? I think silence keeps peace." "Peace without justice isn't peace, Pastor," she said softly. "It's just quiet fear." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "You're a stubborn woman." "Blessedly so." After hanging up, Ethel went to her porch and looked out at the empty road. It stretched straight toward the mountains, still dusted with snow. Somewhere beyond those hills, she imagined 15 motorcycles glinting in the sun. She whispered to the wind, "If only the world could hear your engines again." That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, she sat down at her kitchen table with pen and paper. She wrote a short note to Tank. "Dear son, the town's turned cold, but I'm keeping the fire burning. You tell the boys not to worry about me. God's still got his eye on this old woman. Love, Miss Ethel." She sealed the envelope and smiled to herself. Just writing it made her feel lighter. But that night, she couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the windows, and every creak sounded like footsteps. She got up, lit a lamp, and sat by the fire with her Bible open. "Lord," she prayed aloud, "I don't ask for the storm to stop. I just ask you to help me stand in it." Outside, the wind quieted, and faintly, so faintly she almost missed it, she heard a low, distant rumble, like thunder rolling over the hills. Her heart leapt. She went to the window. Nothing but moonlight and empty road. Still, a smile spread across her face. "They're out there," she whispered, "and I'm not alone." She blew out the lamp, the warmth of hope glowing in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. Morning came slow and gray, as if the sky did not want to get out of bed. Miss Ethel stood at her sink, washing the last egg stains from the window frame with warm, soapy water. The smell of dish soap mixed with the faint scent of smoke from last night's fire. Her hands moved steady, though her knuckles ached. She hummed a low hymn to keep her courage warm. When she finished, the glass shone. She set the rag on the sill to dry and whispered, "All right then. Clean again." She made oatmeal and sliced a banana over it, then sat at the table with her letters box. She pulled out Miguel's note and read it once more, smiling at the part where he called her the first person who called me son. She imagined his face as he wrote those words, careful, maybe a little scared, but ready to be new. She slipped the letter back into the box and fastened the little brass latch. At mid-morning, a light rain began to fall. Rare for March in their county, but the weather had been playing its own tunes that year. The rain tapped the roof and made a soft silver sheet over the fields. She put on her old raincoat and stepped onto the porch to breathe in the fresh, wet air. Her woodpile looked tidy. The yard swept clean after the winter storms, the fence plain and white again, where the ugly word had been. Something small and dark sat at the foot of her driveway, right where the gravel met the road. At first she thought it was a rock washed out by the rain, but it lay too square and neat for that. She pulled her hood up, walked down the path, and found a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. No return address, only her name in big black letters, Miss Ethel. Her heart thudded once, hard. She glanced up and down the road. No one was there. The rain hid everything beyond the bend. She carried the package back to the porch and set it on the little wicker table by the swing. With careful fingers, she untied the twine and peeled back the paper. Inside lay a black leather vest, soft and worn, with patches sewn on by hand. Across the back, white thread formed a pair of wide wings. Inside the vest, tucked in the lining, she found a note written in thick marker. "You're one of us now. Forever family, the Riders." Underneath the ink, a faint second hand had added a crooked heart and the word, "Mama." Miss Ethel laughed, then covered her mouth, surprised at the sound of it. It had been days since laughter felt safe. She ran her fingers over the stitches. Someone had worked on this for hours. Someone had thought of her. She slipped the vest on over her raincoat. It hung heavy, like a hug. In the kitchen window she saw her reflection, the tidy old woman in a leather cut with angel wings, and she shook her head with joy. "Well, Henry," she said to the empty room, "look at your wife now." She hung the vest on a chair and wrote a thank you note immediately, though she had no address. She wrote it anyway because thanks should be said even when no one could hear it. She told them she would keep the vest near the door, ready to wear when they came back, and she promised to make stew enough for an army. The rain thickened to a steady pour. The sound on the roof grew louder, like a drum keeping time through the day. She lit a small lamp and mended socks at the table. At noon she ate tomato soup and half a grilled cheese, then checked the back door to be sure the latch was tight. Her house felt snug and clean, like a ship in a good harbor. But the calm did not last. Around 2 in the afternoon, an engine rattled up the lane. Not a bike, a truck. She wiped her hands and stepped onto the porch. A pickup idled by the gate. 2 boys sat inside, barely out of high school, caps low, faces set. She recognized them from town, boys who pumped gas at the station, boys who whistled at nothing on summer nights. The passenger window rolled down. The nearer boy cupped his hands and shouted over the rain. "You the biker, Granny?" Ethel kept her voice level. "I'm Miss Ethel to you." The boy smirked. "Here you got outlaw friends." "Friends is a big word," she said. but I don't turn away a soul who knocks." The driver revved the engine. "Best keep your door shut next time. Folks round here don't like trouble." "Then don't bring any," she said, and gave them the smallest of smiles. They stared at her for a beat too long, as if waiting for her to flinch. When she did not, the driver laughed, slapped the door, and they rolled away, tires spitting mud. She watched until the taillights vanished. Only when they were gone did she feel the small tremble in her hands. She rubbed them together, went inside, and locked the door. Not 20 minutes later, the phone rang. Ruth Ann at last. "Ethel? Honey, are you all right? I saw those Vickers boys go up your lane. Nasty as a wet cat, both of them." "I'm fine, Ruth Ann. They came full of words and left full of wind." "Oh, thank the Lord." Ruth Ann's voice softened. I'm sorry I haven't been by. Folks have been watching my car. I hate it, but it's true." "I understand," Ethel said, and she did. Fear is a loud neighbor. "I brought your dish back," Ruth Ann rushed on, flustered. "The cornbread pan, well, I will bring it, I promise. Ethel, they're saying the church board wants to put something in writing, about you, about associations." Ethel felt the words slide over her like rain over slate. "Let them write. I already have my letter." She looked at Miguel's note on the fridge, Tank's letter tucked in her Bible, the vest on the chair. "And so does the Lord." Ruth Ann sniffed. "You're stronger than me." "I'm not strong," Ethel said, gentle. "I'm anchored." After they hung up, the house returned to the drum of rain. Afternoon leaned toward evening. The light in the rooms turned blue and soft. She added wood to the fire and warmed a pot of beans. The leather vest sat in the rocker across from hers, as if someone were wearing it. She caught herself talking to it more than once. "You boys sew real good," she said. "Whoever set those wings knows patience." Thunder rolled far off. The rain came down harder, pounding the roof, smashing into the porch rail, leaping in silver off the eaves. She shut the back door tight and put towels along the threshold. Wind pushed against the house, but the old boards held like always. Near dusk, another vehicle crawled up the lane, headlights fat and blurry in the sheets of water. She tensed, then relaxed as the sheriff's cruiser came into view. Sheriff Porter climbed out, coat collar up, hat pulled low. He jogged to the porch, boots splashing. "Evening, Miss Ethel," he said, tipping his hat and shaking the rain from his sleeves. "Evening, Sheriff. Come in before you soak through." He stepped inside, leaving a trail of wet. His eyes went straight to the black vest on the rocker, the wings bright in the lamplight. He coughed once, cleared his throat. "Got a call about those Vickers boys. Thought I'd make sure they didn't cause mischief." "Just noise," she said. "Noise don't stain a soul." He nodded, then took a slow turn around the room, looking at the neat stacks of letters, the clean window, the pot of beans simmering low. "Smells like home," he murmured, almost to himself. "Any trouble otherwise?" "Words on my fence last week. Eggs last night. I cleaned both." A frown cut a deep line between his brows. "We don't hold with that. You should have called sooner." "I called the Lord. He came right away." He sighed, hands on hips. "Miss Ethel, I know you believe you did right. I'm not here to argue, but I am here to say this. If anything else happens, anything, you call me. I'll come." "I believe you," she said. "And Sheriff, if the boys who did those things are caught, don't be too hard. They're just repeating what they hear. Straighten the root, and the fruit will sweeten." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am." He tipped his hat again, more respectful this time. "Stay dry." When he left, The rain swallowed his taillights almost at once. Night pressed in close to the windows. The storm was full now, wind racing the rain, thunder grumbling, gutters overflowing. She ate a small bowl of beans and a heel of cornbread. She washed up and set out her night things, then chose a letter at random from the box. It was the short one from Wheels, the one with the drawing folded inside. She opened it carefully and smoothed the crayon picture on the table. Her, with a big round halo of hair, holding a steaming pot while stick-figure bikers smiled. A little boy's crooked letters in the corner. "Thank you for feeding my dad." Her throat tightened, but it was a sweet ache. She taped the picture beside the kitchen clock, where she could see it every hour. "There," she said. "That's the time I keep." The storm did not let up. It hammered. And then, when it seemed it could not grow stronger, it hammered more. Water ran down the steps in a thin river. Tree limbs thrashed. The porch swing banged its chain against the post. Clang, clang, clang. Sometime near 10, just as she set another log on the fire, she felt it in her bones before she heard it. A low, steady rumble, deep as a drum under the storm's clatter. She straightened, hand on the mantel. The sound grew, threading through the rain, patient, certain, like a heartbeat coming home. "No," she whispered, half laughing, half crying. "No, you fools, not in this weather." The rumble swelled into a familiar motorcycle growl, then cut to a soft idle near the gate. Headlight glare slid across her front window, jumped to the ceiling, vanished. She hurried to the door, worked the latch with fingers that suddenly would not obey, and pulled it wide. Rain blew in sideways, cold as a river. On the porch stood a tall, broad shadow in a soaked denim jacket, water running off him in sheets. He took off his helmet, and the porch light caught the line of his scarred brow, the strength in his jaw, the softness trying hard not to show. "Evening, ma'am," Tank said, voice low and rough, like wet gravel. "I heard your name in the wind. Figured I ought to check if it was saying something I needed to hear." She did not think. She stepped forward and pulled him into the doorway by the sleeve, as if he were a son coming in from a long field. "Boy, get inside before the Lord decides to start a second flood." He laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound, and stepped in, shaking like a dog. Water ran off his jacket and helmet onto the mat. She pressed a towel into his hands, and another onto his head. "You're gonna ruin your floor," he warned. "I've mopped. Worse," she said. "Close the door." He shut it, and the storm became a far thing, a wash of noise beyond the walls. The kitchen glowed around them, the vest on the rocker, the letters box on the table, beans warm on the stove, the crayon drawing by the clock. Tank's gaze caught on the vest. He blinked. "You got it." "I did." "You sewed these wings?" He shook his head, water dripping from his hair. "Hammer did the stitchin'. I picked the patch. The boys all signed the inside. Check the lining." She turned the vest and flipped the flap. Tiny names marched along the seam in black ink: Tank, Hammer, Wheels, Miguel, and more. She traced the letters with a fingertip, then pressed the leather to her chest. "I reckon I just joined a choir with engines." He smiled, and then the smile fell, and his eyes went bright. "We heard about the fence, the eggs, that paper. We've been mad, but you told me once that being mad ain't the same as being strong." "I did. So I came to ask how to be strong this time." She poured him tea, sat him at the table, and took the chair opposite. The storm sang against the house. The fire answered with its own crackle. Between them, steam rose like a blessing. "Strength," she said, "starts with a soft heart and a steady hand. It ain't loud, it ain't cruel. It holds the door and keeps the light on. It don't hit back when it can help instead." Tank nodded slowly, hands around the warm cup. He looked older and younger at once, like a man who remembered being a boy. "We've been meeting Sundays," he said, "praying out by the shop. The fellas, well, they asked me if we could do something for you. Not fists, something better." "What did you tell them?" she asked. He lifted his eyes. "I said I'd ask you." Thunder rolled like a drum roll. The lights flickered, then held steady. Miss Ethel smiled, and it lit her whole face the way the lamp lit the room. "We'll figure it out in the morning," she said. "For now, you're soaked to the soul. You'll catch your death if you don't get into something dry." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it at her look. He accepted the old flannel shirt she brought from Henry's closet, and a pair of sweatpants from a box labeled Church Rummage. He changed in the hall bathroom and came back sheepish, the clothes a little short, but serviceable. "Now," she said, setting a full bowl before him, "eat. I'll talk. You listen." He bowed his head without being asked. "Thank you," he muttered, simple and real. While he ate, she told him about the boys in the truck, the sheriff's visit, the eggs, the phone calls, the paper. She told him about the letters, the vest, the drawing by the clock. She made no speech. She just laid out the pieces of her days like cards on a table. He finished the last bite and set the spoon down with care. "You stood when you could have sat. You opened when you could have shut. I ain't letting you stand alone." "Son," she said, the word easy and true on her tongue. "I never was." They sat until the storm fell from fury to a lullaby. Close to midnight, she made him a bed on the sofa with Henry's old camp blanket. He lay down, too big for the little couch, but somehow fitting just right. She tucked the blanket around his shoulders, the way she had tucked it around cold strangers months ago, and rested a hand on his arm. "God keep you," she said. "You too, ma'am," he whispered. She turned out the lamp. The house settled. The rain softened to a patter. And in the darkness, the old farmhouse held two steady heartbeats, the woman's and the man's, beating in time with a promise neither of them said out loud. "In the morning, we will stand together." By sunrise, the storm had passed. The world outside looked washed clean, shining wet under pale light. Tank was already awake, folding the blanket from the couch with neat, careful hands. Miss Ethel poured 2 mugs of coffee and joined him at the table. The air smelled of rain and something new, like peace had finally sat down for breakfast. "You sure you slept, son?" she asked. He nodded, smiling faintly. "First real sleep I've had in months." They ate oatmeal in companionable silence. After a while, Tank spoke, voice rough with hesitation. "The boys want to do something for you. Something big, to show the town what kind of woman you are." Ethel raised an eyebrow. "As long as it doesn't involve fistfights or fireworks." Tank chuckled. "No, ma'am. Thinking more along the lines of gratitude. We figured maybe we'd come back, ride out here together, bring some food, supplies, maybe fix up your fence proper, let folks see what kindness does." Ethel sipped her coffee slowly. The idea frightened her just a little. The town already whispered. 100 motorcycles would make them shout. Yet deep down, her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something like pride. "You want to ride out here again?" she asked softly. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "All of us. Every man you helped, and more who heard your story." She set her mug down. "If that's what your hearts tell you, then do it. Just remember, noise don't change minds, love does." Tank nodded. "Love's what we're bringin'." By mid-morning, he was ready to go. The road glistened under the weak sun. He stood by his bike, helmet under his arm, looking almost uncertain. "You'll be all right here?" he asked. Ethel smiled. "Son, I've been all right since the night you knocked on my door." He grinned, then swung his leg over the bike. "We'll come back soon, Miss Ethel. You'll hear us before you see us." "I reckon I will," she said, waving as he rode away. The sound of the engine faded down the wet road until it became only the whisper of the breeze. Back inside, Ethel tidied the kitchen, humming softly. She felt a flicker of excitement she hadn't known in years. Something stirring, something good. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but her heart whispered a promise. Whatever it is, it's worth the noise. And for the first time since winter began, she felt ready for the world to come, knocking again. 2 mornings later, Ethel was sweeping her porch when the still air began to tremble. A faint rumble rolled in from beyond the hills, low at first, then growing louder, deeper, stronger. She set her broom aside and shaded her eyes. The sound thickened until it became a thunder of engines, the kind that made the ground hum beneath her feet. Down the long road, sunlight flashed off metal. One by one, motorcycles appeared over the rise. Then another and another. They came in 2s and 3s until the road shimmered with movement. Ethel's hand flew to her mouth. There weren't 15 this time. There were hundreds. The first bike stopped at her gate. Tank climbed off, helmet under his arm, a wide smile cutting through his beard. Behind him stretched a line of riders as far as her eyes could see. Some carried baskets of food, others tools, paint cans, lumber. "Morning, Miss Ethel," Tank called. "We figured it was time to repay a little kindness." She blinked back tears. "You boys brought the whole world with you," he grinned. "Just the good part of it." Engines went quiet, one by one, leaving only the sound of wind and birds. The yard filled with laughter, voices, boots crunching gravel. A young rider stepped forward and handed Ethel a bouquet of wildflowers. Another lifted a camera, tears running freely. Ethel pressed a hand to her heart. "Lord," she whispered, "look what love can build." The town would see this, every last one of them. But for now, all she saw were faces lit by sunlight and grace. She smiled through trembling lips. "Well," she said softly, "I best get more stew started." By mid-morning, the valley trembled with sound. The roar of engines rolled through the Montana hills like a rising storm. Miss Ethel stood on her porch, clutching her shawl, her eyes wide in disbelief. Down the dirt road stretched a line of motorcycles, gleaming chrome, leather jackets, and sunlight flashing off every mirror. There weren't 15 this time. There were hundreds. Tank was the first to stop at her gate. He cut the engine, removed his helmet, and grinned. "Morning, Miss Ethel," he called. "Told you we'd come back?" Ethel laughed through tears. "Come back? You brought the whole mountain, son." He handed her a bouquet of sunflowers. "These are for you, for the woman who opened her door when no one else would." Her hands trembled as she took them. "You don't owe me a thing," she said softly. "I just did what love asked." Behind him, riders dismounted one by one. Some carried baskets of food, others cans of paint, hammers, and boards. The air filled with voices and laughter. Before long, her yard was alive with motion. Miguel began repainting her fence, sweeping bright white over the scars left by hate. Wheels handed candy to the neighborhood children, who giggled and tugged at his sleeve. Hammer patched the porch steps while others fixed the sagging roof. Across the road, townsfolk gathered, watching in stunned silence. Some folded their arms, others whispered, but when they saw the men working so carefully, so joyfully, their faces softened. Ruth Ann arrived, clutching a casserole. "Ethel May!" she cried, hugging her tight. "I was wrong about everything." Ethel smiled gently. "Love's big enough for late apologies." A news van pulled up, cameras already rolling. A young reporter stepped out. "Miss Johnson?" she said breathlessly. "Are you the woman who sheltered 15 bikers during the storm?" Ethel nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They were strangers that night, but not anymore." Tank stood beside her, his voice steady. "She didn't just give us warmth. She gave us back our faith." The reporter blinked, tears in her eyes. "And now you've all returned to thank her?" Tank smiled. "No, ma'am. We came to thank God for sending her." Applause spread through the crowd. The sheriff arrived and shook Ethel's hand. "Miss Ethel," he said, "you've done more good than I ever could with a badge." She laughed. "Then maybe next time, Sheriff, bring a spoon and help stir the stew." By afternoon, the fence gleamed, the porch stood solid, and her yard rang with laughter. Pastor Whitfield arrived last, hat in hand, eyes humbled. "Ethel May," he said softly, "I was wrong to doubt you." She smiled kindly. "Then don't waste time regretting it. Start believing better." He nodded, tears in his eyes. As the sun sank behind the hills, the bikers mounted their motorcycles again. Engines rumbled to life, deep and strong. Tank saluted her from the road. "You ever need us, Miss Ethel? Just holler." "I'll keep the stew hot," she called back. The engines thundered as they rode away, the sound rolling through the valley like grace set to music. Ethel stood alone on her porch, her heart full. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. "You sure do make a joyful noise." The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, warm and golden. Miss Ethel brewed coffee and looked out at her freshly painted fence. The yard was quiet now, but her heart still echoed with the roar of yesterday's engines. Ruth Ann stopped by with biscuits, smiling shyly. "Whole town's talking about you, Ethel. They're proud." Ethel chuckled softly. "Took a storm and 100 bikes to thaw their hearts." She hung the black vest with angel wings on a hook by the door and whispered, "Family." As she sat to write in her journal, she smiled through tears. "One open door," she wrote, "can change the world." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of engines, distant, steady, faithful. Ethel closed her eyes. "Ride safe, boys," she whispered, "and thank you, Lord, for sending them my way." A year later, winter returned to the valley, soft and silver under the morning sun. Miss Ethel's farmhouse stood bright and welcoming, its white fence shining against the snow. Inside, she stirred a pot of stew, humming an old hymn. Her kitchen smelled of rosemary, bread, and peace. Outside, the faint hum of engines began to grow, a sound she knew by heart. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door just as the first motorcycles appeared over the hill, tires crunching on the frosty road. Tank led the way, followed by dozens more. They parked neatly by the fence, laughter filling the cold air. "We told you we'd come back, Miss Ethel," Tank said, smiling wide. "Annual visit." She beamed. "And I kept the stew warm." As they gathered in her yard, sharing food and stories, Ethel looked to the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for turning strangers into sons." The engines roared again, deep, joyful, alive, rolling through the mountains like a hymn of grace that would never fade. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.